Hi, I'm Twommy Forrest, board member of FinFest USA, and on behalf of the board, I welcome you to this presentation with Carla Nordenstrang. We are re-recording this portion of the program as the introduction was not captured when we aired the presentation back in June of 2022. FinFest is honored to bring to you Professor Nordenstrang, a noted sociologist, media expert, and author. He is Professor Emeritus at Temple University and former president of the International Organization of Journalists. He is the author of over 60 books and 300 articles. Today, he will speak to us regarding Finland's entry into NATO. And we hope you enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. This is opportunity for me to meet American Finnish people around there. Last time when I was talking on an important decision in Finland, namely the decision to join the European Union, I was actually in Minneapolis in autumn 1994 as visiting professor at the University of Minnesota, and I was asked by Marian and the local American Finnish community to give a briefing of that decision. There was a referendum at that time about whether or not Finland should join the European Union, and about 60+% of those who voted were in favor of joining, and consequently then Finnish Parliament and President decided that this will be so. So Finland has been member of European Union for a long time, but it has consistently remained outside the military alliance of NATO all these years. However, now a month ago, a decision was made to seek for membership in NATO, and I will now lead you through a process of 3 stages. First of all, looking at the very drastic changes in the mindset of the general public and in the whole political elite of Finland, which led to this alignment. And secondly, we shall then have a little bit historical context of Finland's position in relation to Russia, especially from the 18th century to the post-Cold War era. And thirdly, then we shall look at contemporary positions and discussions in Finland on NATO, different arguments in favor and against membership. So this is the tour program, and we shall now move to the first item, the current and recent development towards the membership application. It was 17th of May when it happened, and we shall look backwards until January, the steps leading to that crucial decision. First of all, here is a government press release of 17th of May, saying that on Tuesday, 17th of May, the President of the Republic of Finland decided on the proposal of the government to notify the North Atlantic Treaty Organization of Finland's interest to engage in talks on accession to NATO, and appointed a delegation to Finland's accession talks to be held within NATO and its member countries. So this was a final step. that was preceded by a historical vote in the Parliament of Finland on the same day, and the long debate lasted 4 hours, and arguments in favor of and against the membership were aired there. It also had a wide international coverage. Here is news from Reuters, even displaying a photo of the Finnish Parliament's electronic voting results in a board in front of the Parliament podium. And you see there what was the absolutely amazing majority. Out of 300 members of Parliament, 188 were in favor of Finland's joining NATO. 8 were against, empty or don't know was 0, and absent of the 200 members of Parliament were 3. So this is one of the most overwhelming majorities in any votes that we have had in the Parliament. Well, before that, on the 15th of May, there was a government report on NATO membership, and the text here already displays very clearly the logic behind this step to look for membership. Namely, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a fundamental change has taken place in the security and operating environment of Finland and Europe. So this was the reasoning, the justification presented not only in the government's documents, but basically in the whole public debate on the topic, which was very, very active and flourishing those days. On the same day also, the Prime Minister, we have a woman Prime Minister, as you know, 35-year-old Sanna Marin, and the President, Sauli Niinistö, who could be the father of our Prime Minister, they gave a joint statement. Here are the 2 pillars of Finnish state organization. The president is the commander-in-chief of the army, and mainly responsible for foreign policy, international relations, whereas domestic affairs and also the European Union affairs are in the hands of the Prime Minister and the government. So they are 2 pillars, and very seldom they jointly sign something. This was expression of will, which clearly indicated that they both are in favor of the NATO membership. Then 1 month earlier, in April, Prime Minister Sanna Marin visited Sweden and met her colleague in Stockholm. And although the press release is more polite and wishy-washy of the content of NATO membership, it's very clear that that was the main topic of their discussion. Sweden was much more reluctant to express a will to join. There was a traditional neutrality of Sweden behind it, and they were discussing, as is the practice in Sweden, much more thoroughly, while Finland was jumping practically from day to day into more definite decision. Anyhow, this visit is part of a historical process, which in April already turned so much towards or in favor of the NATO membership, that all observers could see that it's only a matter of time when Finland's political elite will take the step. And they took it then 1 month later. Now, just at the same time, when this meeting in Stockholm took place, there was a release of a very important report which the government had commissioned, report on the security environment and sort of choices and options for Finland. Changes in the security environment is the title, and it was supposed to be almost scientific, cool, objective description of what has happened after the invasion of Russia to Ukraine, and all that followed from that step in the form of sanctions and military assistance, etc. It officially did serve the function like a baseline, a think piece for political decision making. However, observers already at the point of its release could see very clearly and express some criticism of the fact that in such a crucial issue, it was obviously just sort of stepping ground to justify the membership of NATO. I think this document will be critically analyzed by generations of historians, like also the consequent debates in the political parties and parliament and other civil society circles about how thorough and comprehensive indeed was the decision and the steps towards the final position. Anyhow, this was in mid-April. And of course, everything started to take fire on the 24th of February when Russia invaded Ukraine. Here is a photo from the YLE TV news service. We don't have, unfortunately, English service, so I could not pick up a Finnish English from Finland, English glimpse of news of that day. But you see, I think these maps of the war situation were circulated everywhere, and day after day there were more and more devastating sights of cities and the ruins and people fleeing their homes and refugees going out from Ukraine to Poland and elsewhere. So all this started on the 24th of February, and it was such a surprise, even if Russia had made it known already in late last year that something is possible to happen, but they denied to the last moment that it will really happen. And everybody was so surprised. This was anyhow a date, 24th of February, 2020, will be like the Sarajevo shots of the beginning of the First World War, which will be written into all history books, I'm sure. So let's remember that this was the pivotal date which determined then the developments in Finland. Now, in January, 1 month before the Russian invasion, there was an interview by Sanna Marin to Reuters, and there she said that it's very unlikely that Finland will seek for NATO membership during her term as prime minister. So the expectation horizons in Finland politically for NATO membership in early this year were something like not this year, not next year, maybe in the future, depending on how things are moving in the world. But it was very remote option. But in 1 month after this end of February, situation changed completely, and NATO got like a sort of a sudden boost behind it in such environments like Finland, which of course has this 1,300 kilometers long common border with the Soviet Union, and which used to have 2 wars during the Second World War, first Winter War, and then the so-called Continuation War. And many parents or grandparents of current generations were there in the front, and this whole war is not just fiction and pictures. It's very much brought real memories and feelings to the minds of people when television night after night, day after day was bombarding with the reports from Ukraine. Okay, now let's move on. I have here a little summary of the positions of political parties and members of parliament in January. In January, an overwhelming majority of political parties and members of parliament supported Finland's traditional position of military non-alliance, adopted after the World War and confirmed in the famous YYA agreement with the Soviet Union. It was one of those things which were dictated by the winner of the war. Soviet Union defeated Finland, let's be frank about it, and Finland, and then it was part of the whole allied constellation politically, including quiet approval of the United States and UK and so on, that this Soviet-Finnish special relationship can be sealed or cemented by such an agreement. And even if the agreement was revoked after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and even if Finland joined the European Union, the same sort of non-allied line, which was called Paasikivi-Kekkonen line, according to the 2 main presidents after the Second World War, it still was in force in January this year. Now, of the 7 parliamentary parties, only 2 in January, the Conservative Party Kokoomus and Liberal Swedish People's Party, advocated NATO membership on the basis of their party Congress decisions. And as many as 138 members of parliament were inquired by journalists to be against NATO membership, or at least be indifferent, not definitely advocating NATO. So it was something like 3/4 of the parliament were against or not actively pursuing. 1/4 was for in in January. Now, Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February, it changed everything. It changed the positions in days and weeks, leading to that what we saw, 188 MPs out of 200 voting in May to join NATO. All non-socialist parties, the so-called bourgeois parties, and the Social Democratic Party, the government party, Prime Minister's party, and the Left League, which inherited, which was later constructed on the basis of the People's Democracy and including communists, they were, their majority was also in favor, although the Left League was divided. President Halonen, who had always been a very vocal advocate of this friendship policy with the Soviet Union and was in personal good terms with Putin, she also turned her position in May at the time when the decision was made. So there was a fantastic development of public opinion. I have here collected some results of the several public opinion polls conducted between 1st of December and 11th of May. And this is really a historical change. In December last year, over 50% of Finnish public said no to NATO. We don't want to join NATO. There were only 23% who said yes, we should join NATO. And the same amount was don't know people, this gray curve. And in February, well, already before February, at the end of January, there was a little bit change of the curves, but the real change was after this Russian invasion of Ukraine. And when we had 50+% no in December, we had 50+% yes at the end of February. And the development went further, so that in May, the public opinion polls showed that over 70% of Finns support joining NATO, and only 10+% were against joining. So there was a discussion also of a referendum in Finland. For instance, President Niinistö supported referendum even in March, but then gradually the arguments in favor of referendum were withdrawn because the opinion polls were so obvious that one could see almost no point in a referendum. Also, there was some fear that Russia might exercise some so-called hybrid influence and get mixed up with the referendum campaigns, etc., like it has been accused to have happened during the American elections, for instance. So anyhow, this is the cool, objective measurement of the Finnish public opinion, which is changing here so drastically that historians and political scientists were completely amazed. And I'm sure this matter will be much more thoroughly analyzed in the future. Now, let me pick up some results of a polling data report from the Defense Ministry, there was a question: should Finland remain militarily aligned, non-aligned as until now? And as you see, the dark curve shows that it was over 50% until autumn last year, that population was for non-alignment, in the same way as has been our foreign policy for the last few decades. And those who were ready to take military alignment, for instance, NATO membership, although this was not a question of NATO, it was a general alignment question. It was less than 40%, typically 20-30%, until the shift of the year, when it suddenly jumped to 70%, after being only something like 30% in the autumn. So this is a longer term, from 1996 to spring 2020. Here we have from autumn 27 to the spring 22 positions about NATO membership. Are you ready to, or do you want to support Finland's membership in NATO? And you see, the support to membership was always really at the 30, definitely less than 40%. Even last autumn 21, it was still less than 40%, and of course women were less eager to join NATO than men, but the average is very clear. And there was this fantastic jump between autumn and spring, and we have among scholars called this hockey stick model. Long stick, more or less stable, then suddenly a curve upwards. It happened. Here is the other against, against NATO, and it's completely opposite direction. Here is an interesting curve about Finnish population's will to defend the country, the military defense. Especially men are over 80% willing to take arms and defend the country, even if the result is uncertain. Women are less, but still both are at a very high level. I think in European and even world scale, this is a very unique show of readiness to defend with arms the country. This should be kept in mind. So I think I have spoken too empathic, too much. Perhaps I should have compressed, and I promise to be more rapid in the with my slides in the next stage. But here perhaps we can stop for a while if Tuomi wants to.
Right. If folks have questions, put them in the Q&A and we'll relay them to Professor. And Marianne and I saw this image, this graph that we're looking at now yesterday, and we're just amazed by it. Maybe not surprised completely, but 90% of a country's population willing to take up arms. And if you're willing, we're going to do a little pop poll. Put it in the chat. Would you be willing to take up arms if whatever country you're in or representing was under attack? Would you do it? As clearly the vast majority of Finns say they would. So put a yes or no in there, and then looks like we're getting some questions in, Professor. If you haven't already, please talk about the importance of Finland's decision to the world as far as standing up to Russia's aggression in Ukraine.
Well, Finland has not made any initiatives outside European Union, and it's mainly been on the sanctions and no special bilateral talks, except President Niinistö has had a couple of telephone calls with Putin, as he used to have even before the war, but no major initiatives in international politics. I think Finland's political capital has been invested 101% to this NATO membership.
Mm-hmm. I had a question as well, because certainly the rest of the world looking at this is seeing this, in part, it's Finland's decision potentially to protect itself from potential aggression from Russia. But it can't help but send a larger message to Russia itself, correct? So that there is this secondary message that's being sent, whether or not the Finns intended that.
Well, I personally think that Finland could have done more than just use this political momentum to look for membership. Finland could have retained its neutrality together with Sweden. Sweden was, by the way, much more prepared to retain the neutrality at least for another year or so. And Finland probably managed to persuade them to join the very Finnish hurried pace in this process. Now, if we would have not jumped to the NATO sort of bandwagon right now, we could have tried to use this traditional neutrality and tried to intervene in this terrible war situation going on in Ukraine, and tried other means in addition to the sanctions, which Finland joined without any reservations, together with all the European Union countries. For instance, proposing some sort of alliance of neutral countries from Ukraine to Finland, which would, in a way, which could be welcomed by Russia. But it was very difficult in Finland to even talk about such options, because the mentality was that if you don't support NATO membership, you are an agent of Putin. And if everybody knew that Russia, the present administration in Russia, is against NATO's enlargement to the east. That was one of the reasons of this whole crisis where we are now. And if somebody would take an inch of action which would look like being giving a little bit carrot to Russia, it was politically almost impossible. There was very little movement, ground of movement in that sense.
Right.
Yeah.
We have another question, an interesting one, because a lot of us have seen that this question of NATO membership potentially is being challenged or blocked by Turkey. What the question is, what is the status of negotiations or talks with Turkey at this point? Do we know?
Well, currently, I'm afraid it's a deadlock now, and Finland and Sweden are very worried of the situation, and so is the Secretary General of NATO. And we will see how it goes. Turkey has listed some requirements for Finland and Sweden, including harder line against the terrorists, or those political people who are labeled as terrorists by Turkey's present regime. So the Kurdish situation is, of course, in the center here, and we'll see how it will go. But currently, no clear outcome is available.
And another question, which you may actually address in the next session, is does Russia claim any Finnish territory? I know you're going to be talking about the last 200 plus years of Russia claiming various bits of Finland. So I don't know currently, though, if there's any claim on any territory that's been proposed.
No, all during these months of this year, when the popular opinion was turning more and more away from understanding even marginally Russia and going more and more in support of joining NATO, all well, that time I would say well, perhaps it's I would need a bit more time to digest this matter.
Okay, good. Well, let's and thanks everyone to their questions, and thanks to responding to our kind of pop poll there. You know, at least in our little sample here, we're running pretty close to Finland in terms of folks' willingness to take up. It could be that we're Finns and Finnish Americans on the call, but but anyway, it's interesting. So
but one has to see in these curves that this strong support for military defense has been there all the time. No hockey stick model works here. It slightly increased, but not drastically. And by the way, I should add still to your previous question about these Russian claims. No, we don't know anything, and even President Niinistö has several times assured that, and our military generals, etc., have told there is no immediate danger from behind the eastern border. The military strongholds are weaker there than they used to be because they have moved things to Ukraine front, and also all through these years, the next 50, 70, 80 years, Russia has had no territorial claims on Finland. But it's a different thing in the history, as we shall see in a minute.
Right. Yeah. Let's look at that piece now, Professor. Which is the next section.
Yeah. Well, I would like to just as a context for this mental shift which took place in Finland this year, we should remember that Finland has always been a border zone. First, for 6 centuries as part of Kingdom of Sweden, and and then for 108 years as a Grand Duchy of Tsarist Russia. And since 1970 is an independent state. Only 5 years we've been independent so far. But now I have here a little show, but I'll run it through, although it very quickly, although it would invite us for exciting journeys to various wars. First of all, the 300 years of Finland between Sweden and Russia. I'll start from 1700, from the Great Northern War, which lasted over 20 years, and it had a very important side affair. It ranged all through Sweden and Norway and so on, as you know, and as you can see in the history books. But there was a particular aspect of it called the Great Wrath in Finland, especially in Ostrobothnia, from where so many people have emigrated to the United States. There was a Russia succeeded in occupying practically all of Finland, and especially Ostrobothnia. They came all the way to the Gulf of Finland, not Gulf of Finland, but the Ostrobothnia Gulf, and they raided Ostrobothnia for years, and there are generations who still remember that misery of people when the Russian soldiers were doing all possible harms, to put it politely. So that war finally ended 1721, namely 201 years ago, in the Treaty of Nystad, Uudenkaupungin rauha. Then there was a Russia-Swedish war, 1741 to 43, leading to the annexation of Finland's southeastern corner to Russia in the Treaty of Åbo in 1743. I will have maps showing this in a minute. Then Finnish War, 1808 to 9, with Sweden's defeat by Russia, whereby Finland became an autonomous part of Russia in the Treaty of Fredrikshamn in 1809. And after independence, the Treaty of Tartu in 1920 confirmed the border with Russia, with the Finnish maiden getting her second arm with Petsamo. Let us look at these historical stages in a show of map of Finland. This is the Nystad Treaty. Finland is more or less like it is today, except Lapland, which was no man's land. It was actually part of Sweden. Finland was also part of Sweden. Here, all this on the left is Sweden, and all this is Russia. So we could paint this on the left yellow and this red, but I just for clarity painted Finland only, and it means the yellow is Swedish. We were integral part of Sweden. Then the next was this Treaty of Åbo after the Swedish-Russian short war. And Russia succeeded in capturing a territory up to the Kymi River here, and it was annexed to Russia, but otherwise Finland remained the same. Then the next war was between Sweden and Finland, and as I explained, and it was a misery for Swedish army. They were defeated badly by the Tsarist army, and Finland became part of Tsarist Russia, but not an integral part as it has been in Sweden. It got a relatively high autonomy. That's why I have not painted this red, which is the color of Russia. Right after independence, Finland's borders in the east were much bigger than they are today. We got in Karelia a lot, including Viborg. This was only 20 kilometers outside St. Petersburg, very close. And then you see, after the Winter War, there was a treaty, peace treaty, Moscow Peace Treaty. Finland lost Karelia, but it did still possess this Petsamo. What we say, the Finnish maiden had two arms, one towards Norway and Finland. Here is a point where Finland, Norway, and Sweden are meeting each other at the top of that arm. The other arm goes to the ocean, where currently is one of the most important military places for nuclear weapons and submarines, Murmansk in Russia. But it was part of Finland, this Petsamo area, and Finland had there a mine, nickel mine, which in 1940, when Finland was out from the Winter War by losing all these people, and a lot of refugees went to resettle in Finland. And then when Finland started to negotiate for the continuation war, one of the reasons that Germans, Hitler was so interested in Finland was actually the nickel mine of Finland here in Petsamo. And Finland had here access to the open sort of ocean, which is free of ice all around the year. So this was strategically most important part. But then when we had the continuation war between 41 and 44 and 45 in a way also, we lost that Petsamo, and we lost also some other areas in Finnish territory. So and also we got here is a star between Helsinki and Hanko. It's the Porkkala area, which was rented by Soviets for a military sort of camp. Before that, after the Winter War, we had rented a little bit of the top of Hanko to the Soviets. So Soviets had some presence in southern coast of Finland after both wars, Winter War and continuation war. Now,
Professor,
I think we are now ready to move to the next final stage. But if you want to have another moment of chat, we can perhaps have a break here.
there are a couple more questions that came in. They're different in nature. One is more historic about what was the nature of life in Finland like at the end of the 19th century under Russian rule. Was one, and then a broader question about the rationale for the concept of neutrality, policy of neutrality.
The life in Finland during so-called autonomy from 1809 to 1917 was mostly, I would say, 80% positive. It was really the kind of wake of Finland's or rise of Finland's economy. It was rise of Finland's culture. It was rise of Finnish sort of civil society, very good period until roughly the end of the 19th century, when Tsarism got under increasing pressure from the bottom, and it was threatened, and there were all these in the beginning of the 20th century, there were even attempts of coup attempts and so on before the final revolution. The more the Tsaris got under pressure, the more they put straitjacket over Finland too. But still, Finland succeeded in being the first country with general suffrage. There was elections where everybody could vote, including women, and women could also become candidates in elections. So Finland made very great leaps forward politically during the autonomy period. So before autonomy, you see, there was an opinion of Finnish generals which had this slogan: we are not Swedes. We don't want to be Russians, so let's be Finns. And in a way, this Finnish special approach was materialized more or less during the autonomy period. Still, there were difficult moments and years in the suppressive years of Russia in the beginning of the 20th century. At one stage, a Finnish activist of nationalist movement shot the governor of Russia, called Bobrikov, in Helsinki. And he was, of course, celebrated as a national hero, whereas Russians called him a terrorist. But it was one of those things. Anyhow, by and large, I said 80% it was positive, 20% there were negative and troubled times. So the other question was about Finnish neutrality policy, or?
Yeah, just to discuss a little bit more about what the policy of neutrality and why adopt that policy.
Well, after the war, Russia was happy enough to make sure that Finland will not be used as a stone to, or a channel to invade Soviet Union. It was a very clear policy, and that was written into the Treaty of Cooperation and Friendship between Finland and Russia, or Soviet Union at that time. And the policy of neutrality still was left for Finland as a maneuvering ground. Finland was allowed to join United Nations, the Nordic Council, and several international organizations. But of course, NATO, after it was established at the end of 40s, was out of question. It was totally outside any imagination of Finland under those conditions of Soviet dictated security house where we were living at that time. On the other hand, we had relative freedom, and one of the high noons of that period was the Security and Cooperation Conference of Europe, which Finland initiated in the early 70s and which culminated in the signing of the so-called Helsinki agreements in summer 1975. Our President Kekkonen had that like the the biggest star in his political career. And now, before all this setback caused by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, President Niinistö was suggesting that we might try to organize another Helsinki conference when it is 50 years from the original one, namely 2025. And he officially started to make preparations or soundings through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to take steps towards that. But of course, now all such initiatives are frozen or simply drowned into this terrible situation where we are now.
All right, let's proceed to your final section then.
Yeah, final section is just a kind of summary of positions in favor and against joining NATO. This is just my compilation of, I have 7 arguments in favor of NATO and 7 arguments listed against joining NATO. I could have 20 arguments in both, and I could sort them out in a more logical way according to military aspects, political aspects, or cultural and value aspects. But this is just a sort of ad hoc list of arguments in order to give food for thought to my Finnish American people. So first of all, President Ahtisaari at his time was rather unusual because he was speaking in favor of NATO as a president, and a few years when he had left the presidency. Finland should sit in all international tables. After EU, it's logical to go to NATO. He had a kind of formal organizational outlook. Second argument, Finland's geopolitical position should not be determined by big powers as Tehran. Ex-Prime Minister Aho, for instance, represents that position. And this means NATO, we should be free to go to NATO, and we should not be dictated by Russia or any other big powers. This is very close to the position of President Niinistö, who said very clearly that practically in January he learned from the Russian Putin's government positions that they do not give Finland the freedom to choose ourselves the position, whether or not to align. But Niinistö saw that Russia is sort of imposing us certain limits, and that made him turned him against the sort of non-alignment in favor of NATO. At least he says so. Then Marin's government officially has a position which already was quoted in those releases I shared with you, namely that Finland's security and operating environment is drastically changed after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So this invasion of Ukraine is the explanation for a change of environment, and we shall respond to this change of environment by looking for NATO membership. Then more in the general public is a feeling that Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its unpredictability, unreliability, have created a real threat to Finland. This was not felt by all. For instance, myself, even if I'm a son of officer's family and have gone to army and so on. I haven't felt very personally this anxiety after the. I have been convinced that Russians have no point of invading Finland. Why should they go into such a mess? But then people respond, well, why did they go to Ukraine, which was obviously a mess also? And especially people whose parents have fled from Karelia and who have war time memories very clearly in their consciousness, they have suddenly been psychologically agitated to be very much under feeling of threat. Okay, then let's go next. Only full membership will provide security under NATO's Article 5. Advocates, especially in the political right, who have said so already for 20 years, they repeat it now more and more, say, well, you can always talk of all these little things, but the real thing is whether NATO will militarily defend us. And it requires this full membership. Then there is also a sector of those NATO supporters whom I have called hardliners, and they are quite many, especially in the social media. Oh, you should read the stuff which is circulating there. It says that Russia is fundamentally an insane nation, with criminal Putin only its latest manifestation. And that is why the strongest possible protection is needed. So here are 7 arguments in favor of NATO, which I have just eclectically picked up here. We could make it much more elaborate, this analysis, but this is just food for thought to start thinking. Second, now the positions against Russia. First is Russia does not cause a real threat to Finland. There is a hysteria, kind of war hysteria, which is largely agitated by media. Many people, serious people, I have to say, to an extent, to a large extent, also me, think this way. But then there is another argument. NATO will create a new iron curtain between Russia and Europe, escalating tension on the Finnish-Russian border. Finnish-Russian border, if you look at the maps, is really important and long. It's longer than all the Baltic countries together until well, the other countries all the way to Ukraine. And if this new iron curtain is erected there, it's not very good for the life here, right behind the border. Then NATO membership will shrink Finland's international sphere of operation provided by military non-alignment, including these Helsinki conferences, etc. Then Finland is militarily associated already, not member, but we are in the partnership for peace mode with NATO, which means that our army is very much compatible with NATO already. And we have also bilateral agreements with USA and UK for defense area. And even in EU, although it doesn't have its own army, it offers political and some police and other guarantees. So there is a lot of shield and deterrent already in the existing arrangements. This is one of the arguments. So we don't need a NATO as another step. Finland's own army is quite strong, including the recently bought F-35 fighter fleet. And therefore, we don't need necessarily such an increasing deterrent, since our army is already very, very good as such. Then NATO as a community of Western values is an illusion, as lately shown by Turkey, or I should say Turkey, in order not to call it that animal that we are eating on certain traditional days, but just a name of a country without any connotation of else other things. So this is one argument, and then the seventh one in my list is a very general kind of idealistic. NATO represents militarism and the arms race, which should be reduced rather than increased, in the spirit of President Eisenhower, who warned against the military-industrial complex in the 50s. And what really should be done is to put all resources to the existential crisis of environment and global warming, which is threatened, which threatens us all. So there are arguments at various levels, and there has been a fairly heavy debate, but it's obvious that under the light of these curves that I showed you in the public opinion, there was no possibility for a real equal debate of for and against. It was obviously an avalanche, a tsunami in favor of joining NATO, which happened in Finland. And therefore, these are little pockets of debates here and there, and pretty much in balloons of like-minded people who are sort of strengthening or supporting their own ideas. Still, I would say at the end, to leave a little bit more positive view, life will go on as NATO member, more or less like before. It doesn't cause very big difference to the everyday life of people, and also to the political life of people. Some changes, yes, but not too much. Then clashes of opinion, which were brooming and flashing during these months, they will hopefully turn to dialogues and more rational, not just shouting and labeling each other to servants of Putin or imperialists or whatever, but rather kind of rational debate of the various options where we are going. And in any case, it's very clear that social scientists, political scientists, military scientists, etc., they have a lot of material for research out of what has happened now in this Finnish process, in this Finnish path to NATO membership. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Professor, if you, we have a few more questions that have come in. We have can stick around for another 13, 15 minutes or so. We can try and get to those if you're okay with that.
Yes.
Right.
And I also just launched the poll.
We have another poll going. So
Yeah.
A range of questions. One, is there any basis for Russia's recent threats to Gotland? And would that type of threat apply to any Finnish islands or other strategic locations?
Well, first of all, we should see that the Baltic Sea is now turning with Finland's and Sweden's entry to NATO. It will turn into NATO inner sea.
Mm-hmm.
If America would face a similar thing somewhere in its neighborhood, like for instance, Mexican Gulf, for instance,
right.
If it suddenly would turn into we don't have any more Warsaw Pact or any other hostile military alliance, but it would be something. It would be just a disaster. And therefore, I think I have been very, very surprised to see how little Putin and Lavrov and others have been talking about the Baltic Sea.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the islands are of great interest to Russia, but I think they certainly will not touch or aim at making any territorial moves regarding Gotland or Öland or the Finnish Åland, Ahvenanmaa, between Finland and Sweden. That is defined by also Russian or Soviet approval into a non-military area. There is an international status for not only alliance-free but military-free area, and I think they will. Nobody is interested in breaking the balance of forces in the Baltic Sea, but certainly the Russian generals must be very concerned, and maybe they can try to find innovative solutions how to cope with the situation. They have only internationally defined corridors from St. Petersburg and the other areas to the outer sea, and their strange island, or not island, but part of Kaliningrad between the Baltic countries at the sea is an important military base, which they must reach by sea and air and so on. But I think, in short, it has formally changed the environment for Russians especially, and for NATO it has been a great victory to have Finland and Sweden give their sort of territory for NATO's operations. But I think it will not be a major gateway to disaster.
Mm-hmm. Another question, prior to the invasion, did Ukraine have any similar talks or relationship with NATO in process? And was that part of the rationale, perhaps, for invasion?
Well, I or Finns are no experts of this question, because we are just at the mercy of the general knowledge circulating in diplomacy and military circles and so on. But I think it's probably, I think the only official line, as I happen to know, is Ukraine's president's declaration that we are not going to look for NATO membership. In that much he is able to yield to the Russian sort of demands. So he has that item on his plate when going to the peace treaty or peace negotiations at one stage. But then there are all these wars going on in various parts of eastern Ukraine, and it depends how the position will stand to remain outside NATO. But of course, NATO countries, including Germany later, have been active in supporting or sending weapons to Ukraine and helping it to survive under this superior military pressure by Russia.
Another question is, does Russia actually fear any sort of aggressive action by NATO, or is it more kind of a balance of power question?
I think it's more a balance of power and kind of politics, including home politics for Putin's government.
Right.
NATO is a kind of construct which is a central bad element in their universe, and it's very difficult to say what they really think or say, because the social reality and the information environment in Russia is totally sort of fabricated, and it's really sad to see how the Russian people are forced to live in an illusory environment. And for instance, they can't even call the Ukraine war a war. It's called if you call it war, you are fined, or in the worst case put to prison. You must only use the term special military operation. Even I have noticed it in among scientists and scholars when we are talking of the world events and so on. The Russians do not let the word war come out of their lips nowadays, even in international conferences.
A little different tone. This is a question for regular folks. This seems quite an emotional decision, but don't you think that the parliament considered the for and against arguments appropriately?
Now I didn't get, I'm sorry.
So do you think that the Finnish government and parliament considered the pros and cons of joining NATO appropriately? Do you think that they went through the process they should have in terms of making this decision?
Well, perhaps my display of these arguments and the developments in spring this year shows the answer to this question.
Right.
It's very difficult often to argue, because neither side, if we speak of pro and against NATO, neither of these sides has firm empirical evidence of what will happen. It's all speculation. Whether Russia is a threat, whether cooperation with individual countries in addition to Finnish own army is enough. It's all sort of psychological beliefs. We are operating with beliefs, not with information and hard facts. That's why it's so difficult to say what would be advisable.
Right. We have a couple more questions coming in. In the current light, would it be wise to accept Ukraine as a NATO member as a preventative measurement a year ago when they requested that? Didn't Ukraine request NATO membership a year ago? Sorry, I'm ignorant on that. that point?
Well, at some stage, I think they did, but I think
Right.
it was relatively early in the war
Right.
that President declared that we shall not. So Ukrainians have shown certain flexibility. They have already started the give and take negotiations that way.
Mhm.
But of course, real negotiation should happen at a serious table, and it has not yet started, unfortunately. The only thing they have been able to do is so far to agree on these rescue corridors for
Mhm.
civilians to go out of the bombarded towns.
You brought up earlier that the question of Sweden, and from what I've read, it seemed that there was an agreement that both countries would seek it at the same time. One could not go without the other. Was there a similar shift in public opinion over the same period in Sweden as Finland? Have you looked at comparable data from that country?
I think we have comparable data, although I did not pull them here. And I would say it was. This is not completely clear how it all went. There will be books by journalists and political scientists written about these negotiations, but it was very clear this time Finland was the driving force. We were in driver's seat, and Swedes came along first reluctantly, then more or less willingly, and it definitely was then a joint application. But if Sweden would have come to a different conclusion, I think Finland would have gone ahead without Sweden.
Interesting. Okay.
It's interesting, when this joint application was sent, submitted to Sweden, the main newspaper in Sweden wrote, "Thank you, Big Brother," or because Finland traditionally is considered in Sweden for centuries as a inferior, a little bit criminal, drinking, badly behaving partner. Of course, they admit Sibelius and so on, but Sweden has had almost a kind of superiority complex. But now, in this case, they suddenly admitted that we have been too slow and sort of amateurish in Sweden. You took the lead, and thank God you succeeded in persuading our politicians. Of course, these were pro-NATO editors and so on who did this, but I think it reflects something.
Well, and that's a whole nother line of thought there. If this move, whether it's right or wrong, really does put Finland's leadership in a different light, both with Sweden and the Nordic countries generally, and in Europe overall. I mean, they are showing a certain type of leadership that folks maybe didn't expect from them.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
We've passed our hour and a half mark. I know there may
be but if you reduce that break, I think we are more or less in hour and a half.
Right. There may be some additional follow-up questions, Marianne. I don't know if folks either now or after contemplating, if they want to send questions along. Clearly, this is an important topic. You presented a lot of really interesting information. We've had a large audience today, so people are engaged, excited, interested. So, if there is our follow-up questions, I want to see if we can help folks answer those. Marian, is there a process for that?
Well, I think that what we'll do is, if they can write to info@finfest.us, we can collect questions and we can then post some answers further.
Great.
Okay,
Appreciate that.
but
And of
I
course,
do
this-
think we,
Yeah.
yeah,
This recording will be posted on the website, so you can return to this and use it as a reference, or friends, colleagues, families were not able to attend today, please let them know that they'll be able to access this.
Hopefully you can cut off from the recording this embarrassing.
you know, we'll try to figure out how to do that. Yes.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well-
So I think we do have to sign off right now, but let's sign off
Yeah.
by saying that right now in Duluth, they're running Grandma's Marathon. And there
Okay.
are 40,000 people extra there in Duluth because of it. And next year in July 26 to 30, we will be at least 12,000 people in Duluth attending a FinFest, which will have more of these kinds of seminars and opportunities for questions and answers.
Yeah.
Thank you very much,
Yeah.
Paula.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
everyone
you,
for
and
joining
good
us
luck
today.
for the rest of the weekend.
Thank
And
you.
thank you, Tuomi,
Bye-bye.
for being a very good moderator.
My pleasure.
Okay.
All right,
Thank you.
take care.